Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Meriden. My name is Jeff May, a member of the Worship Associates team, and on today, this day before Independence Day, we are presenting this pre-recorded virtual service as many in our congregation are away and spending time with family and friends. Next week, we will begin our summer worship service series, which begin at 10 o'clock instead of our usual 11 o'clock. They begin at 10 o'clock, and they will be in person here at 328 Paddock Avenue in Meriden. When possible, we will be sharing these services with you on Zoom as well if you are unable to attend in person. But I'm the guy who's usually the one sitting here doing all the camera magic and making the online portion of the service happen. And I'm going to be taking a lot of the Sundays this summer off. So if you would like to do so and you're able to do so, it doesn't take a lot of vast amounts of technical knowledge or skill. If you've got a mobile device that that can go online and participate in a Zoom meeting, you can help us by doing that. And if you're interested in doing so, please see me or any one of the other members of the Worship Associates team, Anita, Elaine, Peg Kirkpatrick, speak with us, and we'd be more than happy to help you help. It's been a rough week for those of us who care about justice. It's been a rough week for those of us who care about bodily autonomy. It's been a rough week for those of us who care about the rule of law. Many among us, especially women, are feeling devalued and under attack. And the real fear that a lot of us have is that it will not end here. Those who use fear and division as a means to consolidate power wield unprecedented amounts of that power. And attacks on freedoms, including the freedom to marry the person you love regardless of gender, and even the basic guarantee of privacy in the most intimate personal affairs, they're almost certainly coming under attack in the future under the guise of originalism. But make no mistake about it, it's really about gaining power and control by making people afraid. By making people afraid that these things will strip them of their identity and strip them of what it means to be American. Tomorrow, this country marks its annual observance of independence from Great Britain and the end of the colonial period for the white men, mostly of British descent, who sought to set up their own government and free themselves from British colonial rule. But we are reminded, especially this week, that the struggle for independence and freedom is not over. Far from it. It's not over for the indigenous people who the Europeans savagely displaced. It's not over for black and brown folk who still find themselves subject to massive oppression and injustice. We now know that it's certainly not over for women. It's certainly not over for members of the LGBTQ community. And it's not over for any of us. Because until all are free, none are free. And so as we gather on this day and on this weekend with family and with friends, let us remember as those fireworks crackle and boom in the sky above us that the fight is not over. Let us remember that as difficult as the time is that we may find ourselves in, we must not be afraid, but continue the struggle for justice. We light our chalice this morning, as we do at the beginning of every service, in fellowship with Unitarian Universalists around the world. Let its light be our light. The light we bring to the world by our being, the light we share with every person we touch to guide their way to becoming. Breathe in. Take in the light. Breathe out and share the light with all.
My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak, where sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul, like the old sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end. My sight as deep as the sea. Beating my heart sounds the measures of all that have lost eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Waiting my song is the wind of my breast, and my love flows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love flows over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Once our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
Before we introduce our guest speaker this morning, I'd like to share these words with you by Karen G. Johnson. Do not be alone right now. Do not be alone right now. Gather together. Gathering together grows courage in ourselves and in others who see our numbers swelling. It's a small thing, but right now, it's an important thing. Great sources of wisdom tell us that just because you cannot stem the tide of all hate, it's still the right thing to do the thing you can do. These things add up. Your one thing and my one thing, his one thing, their one thing, her one thing, together, it becomes a big thing. Do not be alone right now. Any liberation, all liberation, is collective liberation. My freedom is bound with yours and yours with mine inextricably. Let us together cast our lots doing this big thing, bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. Fear is an emotional response to a perceived threat, but it is not only emotional, it's physical as well. The fight or flight reactions that we have programmed into us take hold and prepare us to do battle. We feel it in the pit of our stomachs, our heart rate quickens, our muscles tense. Logical thought not required to face the threat at hand gives way to calculating how to save ourselves. And we find ourselves back in the caves of our mind, club in hand, in fear for our well-being, in fear for our identity, in fear for our very life. When we are in immediate grave risk, that reaction may be necessary. But so often the threats we perceive do not require this type of response, and in fact, this response is often self-defeating. Right now, it's easy to feel hopeless and helpless with what we see happening in the world. But if we let fear take over and lock ourselves at some dark imagined point in the future, we stop being. We stop becoming. And we surrender our freedom to those who benefit from fear. In April of 2021, when we were still entirely online, we invited my dear friend, the Reverend David Jarvis, who's a retired minister with the United Church of Christ, to share a message with us. His message that day, "What's going to set you free?" has particular significance to us this morning, and so we share it with you again.
Hi, everyone. I was delighted to be asked to bring you a message this morning. My name is Dave Jarvis, and I've been coming to your wonderful parish for quite a few months now. And so I'm offering you a message which is called "What's Going to Set You Free?" in our theme of becoming for the month of April. So what's going to set you free? Several years ago, when I was driving down to New London, I noticed some writing underneath a bridge. How young people got up there to paint this little sign, I have no idea. But there was no way you could miss underneath the bridge the words that were written in bold white paint. What's gonna set you free? Now there's a question. There's a question. What is going to set me free? What's keeping me from being the person I want to be? What's keeping me from being the person I want to become? There's our word, our theme, become. A great action verb. A great action verb if I ever heard one. To become. I become. You become. He, she, it becomes. We become. You all become. They become. What keeps me from becoming? Pure and simple, what hinders my personal growth and my development as a person is fear. More than anything, it's fear. There may be others, but for me, just plain old everyday anxiety is enough to stunt my development from being a whole person. Always has, always will. The irony about this is that no matter what spiritual master I may study, what religious leader I may follow, whatever system I may read, whatever organization I may belong to, pretty much they all say, love your fellow humans, or the golden rule, and don't be afraid. Fear not. You're going to be okay. Without fail, they all say the same thing. There's nothing that happens that can't be handled. Sadly, however, regardless, I believe I'm a slave to my fears. And it keeps me from becoming. Over 40 years ago, when I was a a young pastor. I had faith, but was also plagued by many fears. How long before people would find out that I was a phony? I was far from resembling any kind of holy man, which they may have expected. What would happen if my congregation, this is going back about 45 years ago, what would happen if my congregation found out I was gay? You must remember back in the late 70s and early 80s, homosexuality was considered by most, not by many back then, by most, that homosexual behavior was a pathology. That was one fear. How would I do in a crisis situation when people were depending on me to be their pastor? I exhausted myself with worry. The spiritual understanding that I was going to be okay somehow evaded me. I did a pretty good job at loving my neighbor and the golden rule and stuff like that, but owning that I had nothing to fear, well, not so much. Holding on to my fears kept this young minister from becoming. Then it happened. I had a pastoral emergency. A 2-year-old boy accidentally pulled a pot of scalding hot water off of the top of a wood stove and got very badly burned where the water had splashed on part of his face and chest. These were the days of the energy crisis in the 70s when many families augmented their oil burners with wood stoves, especially in the northwest corner of Connecticut where I was serving a church where there was abundance of wood. Imagine the mother, what would I say to her? Her back was turned only for a second. Yet I'm sure she's still feeling negligent. The boy who did not understand the gravity of what happened, let alone the pain. The boy and his mother were flown by helicopter from Canaan to the Shriners Burn Center in Boston. I hopped in my car, armed with goodies provided by the church ladies. Hey, they knew how hungry I could get on a 3-hour drive. And I made my way to the Massachusetts Turnpike. All the while I was overcome with inadequacy. I was not worthy to minister to these people. I was a phony. Maybe I'd say something inappropriate and stupid. Some clergy are real jerks, you know. You know it, and I know it. And I didn't want to be a jerk. I didn't want to be one of those jerk kind of preachers. I wanted to be humble. I wanted to comfort. I wanted to let them know they were going to be okay, but I remember praying with my eyes open on the road. As a pastor, it was time for me to fish or cut bait. I remember parking in the parking area reserved for clergy. I entered the hospital and took the elevator to the 6th floor where Tommy and his mom would be. And as the elevator door opened, I immediately saw a young woman kneeling on the floor with her arms extended. About 10 feet away was a small child who was completely bandaged from head to foot with little slits open for the eyes and a little slit for the nose and a slit for the mouth. And she was covered from head to toe, and the woman was saying, "You can do it, Sarah. Come to me, Sarah. You can walk to me, Sarah." And there was a nurse by her side. And I saw that little girl walk very slowly She must have been in the hospital for a long time. And that mother kept on saying, I love you, Sarah. Well, come to me, Sarah. And that little girl walked. And I was a witness to it. She walked slowly and purposefully with a nurse by her side to her mother, whose hands were outstretched. This little girl, whose burns must have been much worse than the little boy I was about to see, she walked. But what really got me was not that she walked, but the smile I saw through the slit in the bandages where her mouth was. The smile that said, I'm going to be okay, I can do this. The action I described couldn't have lasted more than a minute, but that image, that smile, has played a significant role for me as a person of faith, as a pastor, and as a man who understands and accepts the fact that he's in the final quarter of his life. And I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. Just like that little girl. The sad part about being a slave to fear is that it keeps one from becoming. It stunts one's growth, so to speak. What's going to set me free? The ability to walk away from my fears with a smile on my face, accept any consequences with a knowledge that I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be okay. The message of every spiritual leader I have ever read or heard can be broken down to this common denominator, the golden rule, and you're going to be okay. Well, one might say that may work for some people, this okay stuff. But what if you're totally incapacitated? What if you're sick? Maybe you've got cancer. What does being okay say to those people? Maybe you're dying. Maybe you're close to someone who's dying. I can't imagine anything worse than a parent losing a child, though sadly I'm sure there are such things. Living in a concentration camp, trying to survive on the streets of Calcutta if you're poor. We could have a field day calling up the misery of this world. But remarkably, the answer doesn't change. You're going to be okay. That's part of becoming, is owning you're going to be okay. Because being okay does not mean the absence of struggle. Being okay does not mean the absence of suffering. For me, being okay contains the eternal nature of divine love. And of course, cognitively knowing and owning that are two different things. Knowing that God's love surrounds you. Fear is a great manipulator. Scare people to death with lies. Scare people to death with exaggerations. And then present yourself as a savior. We just lived through 4 years of that, didn't we? But I'm not going to go there. You know what I'm talking about. You know, when gay men gather, I don't know if it's the same for other folks in the LGBTQ community, but I can personally attest to the fact that when gay men gather, it does not take long before they discuss, how was it for you? Meaning coming out. How was it? How was it for you? For some, it's so traumatic. I believe one of the largest causes for teen suicide is sexual identity. If not number one, I'm sure it's way up there. Talk about fear of becoming. And we all have our narrative. I remember the early days of gay pride. You had to specifically state you did not want to be photographed on TV. And it wasn't that long ago, folks. Not really. Not that long ago. Think of our two Unitarian Universalist churches and our collective coming out process. Oh yeah, the churches came out. Imagine 50 years ago, 1971, the year I decided to go to seminary. Do you think I would have gotten a ton of support from our two churches back then? Oh, maybe a few would, but just 3 short years after Stonewall. Again, homosexuality was considered a pathology back then. I grew up in that. I came out in that, and so did all of you. Going open and affirming, accepting and loving, being a reconciling congregation, all of those other nifty catchphrases which really mean we're okay with LGBTQ folk. And we survived very well. We became, didn't we? With that understanding of inclusion and acceptance, we became congregation and pastors as we mutually came out of our closets. We became, and the exciting thing is, we're still becoming, aren't we? The minute we put the fear away, we become. I went on retreat several weeks ago to Easton Mountain, and I met this wonderful guy by the name of Pleasant Despain, who's a storyteller, and he wrote this book, Vagabond Tales. And I haven't read a book like that I've enjoyed so much. In it, and it's a spiritual journey, and he writes these words. The renowned author and mythology professor Joseph Campbell said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And then Pleasant continues, the treasure you seek is freedom from past action. Freedom means forgiveness. The source of forgiveness is yourself. Wow. To free ourselves from all that we fear, to own that we're going to be okay, is, I believe, one great big giant step toward becoming. Remember Dr. King's last speech? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountain, and I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. For me, the essence of becoming is owning that you're going to be okay. You have been set free from the chains of fear, and you are now free to love, free to become. God bless you all.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts dwells within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
When we gather in person, we have a custom of lighting candles as we share the joys and concerns of our lives with one another. This morning our service is pre-recorded, but we still want to take a moment to reflect on what is in our hearts and offer those joys and concerns with those around us and in our own hearts. Let us take a moment and pause and light candles.
Spirit of thy Father, come unto me. Come to sing in thy heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow with the wind, rise in the sea, move in the shape of justice, roots hold me close, wings set me free, Spirit of thy Father, come to me, come to me.
Before we end our virtual service this morning, a reminder that this community is supported by the commitment and generosity of our members who support us with their time, their talents, and their finances. And while we may not be among each other to pass the plate, as is our tradition, please remember to make your weekly pledge payment if you do so on a weekly basis. And in whatever way you do, please help support this ministry. Our work is your work. We end our service now by extinguishing the chalice. This marks the end of our time together, but not the end of the light which shines out from this time and place, lighting the world and extinguishing fear. Go in peace, go in love, live in blessing.
We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. I am alone and I am searching, hungering for answers in my time. I am balanced on the brink of wisdom. I'm impatient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. Imperfection to be my crime. In humility I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. On this journey through thoughts and feelings, finding intuition in my heart, I am gathering the tools together. I'm preparing to do my part. All of those who have come before me, and together and be my guide, loving lessons that I will follow. We're all swimming to the other side. When we get there, we'll discover all of the gifts you've been given to share, have been with us since life's beginning, and we never noticed they were there. We can balance on the brink of wisdom, never recognizing that we are right. Loving spirits will live together. We're all swimming to the other side.
We are living neath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will